Thank you, Almeen. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you to the team here at the gallery. It's been an incredible couple days just being here in Brussels with you guys, watching Otis, get ready for this exhibition. Thank you, Otis, for the opportunity to chat with you publicly about this work. We've been privately talking about this series for years now, and it's interesting to see it expand and evolve, the depth of research to expand as well, and your investment in telling these stories. I mean, down to the gear, the custom cowboy boots. But I guess, can you just tell us, I think we'll start how you got to this series and then give people a little bit of background, because I don't want to assume that everybody knows the breadth of your practice. But can you talk to us about how this series started? I know LA, 2019. Can you talk a little bit more about it?
Okay. First of all, thank you everybody for coming, and I really appreciate Larry as well and everybody that made this happen, the whole team of Almin Rich, Ashley as well, and Almin Rich, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to show my works first time in Europe, and I'm really glad we've been able to achieve it. And also, I'm not that very good in talking in public, so.
Don't worry about them. You're talking to me.
Yeah, all of this started for me growing up as a kid and watching a lot of Western movies. And
growing up where?
In Accra, Ghana.
Okay.
And going to the movie theaters and watching a lot of karate movies and cowboy movies. It all started from there. The interest for me was in the fashion, their clothes, and how they speak, the accent, and all that traditional way they wear in the cowboy movies. That is how I got interested in that. But at that time, I wasn't an artist. I was just someone that loved Western movies. And then fast forward when I grew up, and then I found myself doing art and came to the US. That is where the interest started to grow more and more, because during the pandemic, when the protests and everything was going, and I saw the Compton Cowboys, it just brought back my childhood memories and going to the movie theaters and oh, this is actually real. It's not something just in the movies or something. And I didn't know there was African-American cowboys. I thought it was just the Western whites and the normal white people that we see in the movie. So that prompted me to research more on that and to be able to bring these stories out that I thought it was just a movie fiction and all of that, yeah.
And beyond watching movies, your experience at the cinema really is kind of like the beginning of your relationship with art.
Exactly.
And can you talk about that?
It all started as a curiosity, because back then the movie theaters had the artists commission posters to, those the movies that will be shown during the cinema was hand commissioned paintings by artists to use as an advertisement for people to come to the theater. And at that time, I didn't know it was hand commissioned or it was hand painted by these artists until one day I discovered where they were working at the studio they were working, and I saw it. And I thought it was interesting, so I wanted to learn how to draw from then. So that is how come the interest in drawing and actually art started for me. And I didn't know.
How old were you when that?
I was around 14, 15, okay. Yeah, very, very young. And so the interest started from there, and it all started as a hobby. It was just out of curiosity if I can really draw. So it just went on and on and on, and then I wondered if there was an institution that actually teach people professionally how to paint and draw. Until later part in my life, I found out about Ghanata Art College, where I schooled and majored my art in for 4 years. And that is where I started developing and tried to find my language as an artist professionally.
Okay. We have some Ghanata alum.
Yeah, I have some of my Ghanata and artist friends here.
So you were going to the movies, you discovered the artists who were commissioned to make movie posters, and they taught you how to draw, the beginnings of painting. But what was it about the figure? What is it about painting a person that interests you? Why is that the direction that you've gone?
At the beginning, that wasn't my focus. It was only for me to try to recreate what I see. And it started with portraits, like finding images in magazines and newspapers and just trying to recreate just to better my skills and all that. And when I went to Granada Art College, I was only interested in abstract and landscape, because for me it gave me the freedom and then the free will to express myself there, for somebody not able to tell you what to do, and just the freedom to express yourself with colors. And when it was getting close to graduate, the art scene started changing. That's where digital started coming in and all that. So I thought it would be better for me to learn more of the digital art, so that when I come out of college, I can find a job to do, so that I will learn both skills. So my interest then diverted into photography. That was where I started exploring with a camera and started photographing people. And again, it wasn't there as an interest. It was just trying to better the skill of photography. But again, I took one photo, and then I just kept staring at the photo, and that's like the intensity of the photography, and then the image just like hit me and it sparked something. So again, coming back to my childhood, I tried to recreate that photograph that I took, paint it over and over and over and over again, to see whether I will still have the same emotions when I look at the painting as I took the photograph. And then I had that same feeling. So I decided to explore more on that, and then try to document the human, like people that I meet along the way, or my friends or my families. And that is how the figure started for me. So the interest grew bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
And then you moved from Ghana to Portland, Oregon.
Yes.
Not New York, not LA, but Portland, Oregon.
No, surprisingly,
Well, for those of you who don't know, Portland's in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. It's a quiet part of the country. You will see some cowboys there. So, but
Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, US wasn't a place that I wanted to come in the first place. Because back in school, we were taught mostly about European art, their sculptures and their paintings. So we knew the best came from the Europe, because their paintings are masterpieces and all that. So the US wasn't the focus. But again, we all know, I met my wife, and then she convinced me. She's an amazing person, and I fell in love, and then I decided to move to the US, and then we got married, and then in 2017 was when I moved to the US, and when I moved to the US, life was different from me living in Ghana, even with my practice. It was a total different scene. Everything became more personal to me, my experiences and everything, so it impacted me.
Why did it become more personal?
Because back in Ghana, it was more of, my paintings were more talking about the children, and then the laborship, and then the struggles of the kids on the street, and more political and stuff. But when I moved to the US, and as a black person, I also started experiencing the racism and all that. So I thought it would be an interesting, to tap in, since it has something personal to do with me, and then also to talk about other black folks and other African that have migrated to the US and experiencing the same issues that I am.
So coming back to this project in particular, so 2019, 2020 was an inflection point in our society with the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. You embark on beginning this series.
Yeah.
So you discover the Compton Cowboys, and you begin to understand that there's a big gap in information with regard to the presence of black cowboys at the turn of the century, many of them trained by Native Americans and Mexicans. So what was your process to deepen the research? Because I know you collaborate with Ivan McLennan
Yeah.
in this 8-second project. So can you talk about that and how that informs?
My first cowboy that I painted was during my residency, late 2019 in LA. And like I said, during that time, it was just a fictional thing for me. So I tried to bring that into life. That was when I discovered the Compton Cowboys. So I was like, whoa, this is really real. They really existed. So it prompted me to research more and more and more. And that was where the whole idea of this series came about. But I didn't have enough resource, because if I wanted to talk about history in the cowboy, I should, it should be right, and I should say it in the right way or project it in the right way. So I started researching online to see where I can get image. I even contacted the Compton Cowboys to see if they can allow me to come to their community just to talk to them and find out. But with the help of my wife, she found this photographer online in Portland called Ivan McLennan. And he was already doing this project called 8 Seconds, where he goes and photographs the black cowboys in the various states. And he is known for photographing these kind of images. So I contacted him and I said, this is what I'm working on, and I don't have enough resources. And since I'm new in the state and I don't have any kind of relation with these people, you are closer to them. So I would love if you would help me out and provide me with some resources and images so that I can, do this the right way, not just images of my own alone. Because if I want to talk about this story, I want to use the real story of these people and my also imagination when I was growing up. So I contacted him, and then he was willing to give me some images that he took, and it was interesting because he was also doing the same thing that I wanted to do, was talking about these people and their community and their generation and what they've been going on. So he helped a lot with resource and images that really brought out this series.
And so one thing that's important to point out, the images in this show is a combination of images that Ivan provided to Otis that he painted and interpreted in his own way, and then portraits like this one that he shoots in his studio and then creates his own interpretation. So you have this spectrum between response to an image that exists and then creating one. So I went to Portland last year. I put on the hat, the jacket. He took photos. I forgot about it. And then I think we were in Miami, and he was like, oh, let me show you something. And I was like, what is that? Who is that? And so it's interesting, again, thinking about how cinema inspired this series and how he's using this to tell stories and to fill gaps. Can we talk a little bit about some of the paintings in the show? Yeah. So I think this one, is a particularly telling one because you were telling us a little bit of the backstory behind this painting.
The thing about that image and that painting is that we don't actually know the real names of those cowboys. This photo was taken from far, like a way far angle. And this was during a rodeo show, and they were new cowboys that were introduced to the show. And there was a competition going on, like a bull riding competition. And since they were new, they got scared into going into the arena and competing. So it was interesting, the whole emotions and then the fear of going into the rodeo and like participating and all that. So when it got to their turn to take part, the fear took, get the better of them, and then they just said they can't do it anymore. So the whole show has to cancel just because of them. And it was interesting to see that kind of emotion, coming out from them, and the fear of the doing. That shows how dangerous the whole competition and everything. So I thought it was interesting to the way he captured them in that state, and that made me wanted to paint that.
And so when you're looking at a photograph, whether one you took or one that you're responding to in terms of Ivan, how much liberty do you take in terms of referencing the original image versus making it your own?
When it comes to original image, I try as much as possible not to take out the originality out of it, because when you look at the environment, it also gives you the sense of what is going on at that moment. So I try as much as possible to keep the originality of what is in there, just to capture the story for people to also understand what is going on. And then when it comes to my image, it is just a reference of what I thought or how I imagined the Black Cowboys to be. That is why mostly I don't have anything at the background, because then I never had an idea or know what goes on around them. It's just the image that I wanted to project. And now that I've learned a lot about this, I get to find out that there are little details in it that made sense to me but didn't make sense back then, because it was just an awesome thing for me to see. Especially when it comes to the bandanas covering their faces, they had a reason for doing that. And it's mostly the outlaws. When it comes to the Cowboys, the thieves and arm robbers, they only do that just to conceal their identity so that people wouldn't notice them and all of that. And also, when they are migrating from other state to the other states, just the dust from riding the horse so that it wouldn't cover. And as time goes on, the generation, it started to change a little bit. It became more of a gang thing. So the colors of the bandana can determine which gang you belong to or which group you belong to. Yeah. And also, they have a way of wearing the cowboy hat. A show, when you look at my hat, where it's like straight here and then start to curve in. So it's also a way of noticing that you're a true cowboy. The ones that are termed as the fake cowboy has the hat that shapes all the way to the front. It's like pointed to the front. And it's a funny story. One of my friend, the photographer, when he started photographing in these rodeo shows, he didn't know all of this. So he had his hat worn backwards and taking these photos. So all the cowboys were laughing at him, and he was confused. And someone said, "You are wearing it the wrong way." So he decided not to wear it at all. So it's interesting that you watch these things in the movies, but there is a whole lot to it than just the action and all of that. The way of dressing, the boots, and if you see these boots that I'm wearing, it's a customized boot, and it goes through several craftsmen to do this boot, to come up with this boot and all that. So they take into consideration every little details in that to, be the cowboy that they're supposed to be.
Why is it important for you to embody the ethos of this community? Because I can't say I've ever met a real cowboy in my life, but you're committed to the boots, the jeans, and really wanting to tell this, Black story, African American story. Why is it important for you to embody that beyond just painting it?
It's part of my practice. I just don't like to just put an image out there. I also want to live it. That way I have a better understanding of what I'm doing. So I always put myself in that kind of situation, try to be in that same environment as them, for me to understand what I'm doing, so that I will have a better explanation to explain to you all, so that you also understand and sort of have an idea of the reality of it.
And then we talk a lot about history, research, but thinking about art history, how do you just looking at the scale of these works, particularly Benjamin and Courtney, do you think about your work contending with art history, filling gaps within art history? Because we went to the Magritte Museum yesterday, and I think in the lobby we're greeted by this large painting. Was it French Revolution or something like that?
Yeah, I think so.
Something like that. But I mean, if you looked at a lot of traditional European painting, you see these majestic figures on horses, and so that was kind of one of the first things that I thought about when I saw these paintings. So how do you think about these works in dialogue with art history, or is it confronting art history? How do you think about it?
Like I said, when back in school, we were taught about these great masters like Renoir and Monet and all of that. We never saw a real painting of them. It was just in the textbooks and in reading. And in Ghana, we don't have big museums that have these paintings so that you can even go. So I only saw this in real when I came to the States. And you reading about history in all these great masters and all that, and you see these images, and you go to these museums, all these great paintings like we saw there. You walk in the museum, and you don't see people like me represented well. We are always shown in the background, or just hiding, or just the head pokes out, or serving, or this thing. So for me, it's always important for me to represent my people well. And that image right there is an example of it, of the typical, slave master or the kings, and showing on like Napoleon on the horses. And that is why I love Kehinde so much and how he projects his work. So Courtney, that image strikes me well because it reminds me of these huge paintings that I see in museums and how prestige she is sitting on the horse with the flower at the background. There's just something royal about it. And when I'm working on these things, I always picture these images like 20 to 30 to 50 years later. If a kid like me in the future goes to the museum and sees this, it's just, amazing to see a person in inflection like him on this image that really didn't get to see when we go to this museum. So it's important for me when I'm painting these images and how I project them. Yeah.
Another thing that I found interesting is the gender balance. Like typically when we think about cowboys, they're dudes. They're John Wayne, whatever. Why was it important for you to make sure that there was a gender balance? Because I know that was something we were talking about, like, should it be cowboy and cowgirl? Should it be cowboy? You made a very intentional decision to make sure that the women who were part of this community also were properly reflected and weren't diminished. And why was that important for you?
I mean, women are not represented well in a lot of things. And when we use the term cowboy, we always think about the boys. No, we don't even think about the women. But when you go into these communities and then the women also do a lot of like hard work in taking care of the horses and then the ranching. And then some of them are, trained to tame these horses, just like Courtney, where she is like...
She's 13, right?
Yeah, she is 13, and like she's like the best rodeo rider, like one of the best. But again, when you talk of cowboy and rodeo, you don't think of her. You think about the boys and then so it was important for me to also talk about the women as well because they are part of the community, and you can't just take them out and just talk about the boys and all of that.
I like your shirt. Let's talk a little bit about process because I'm sure people are curious about how do you actually make these paintings because the scale has shifted significantly in the last year or so. Can you talk about how something like this will be created?
Yeah. Before I started creating large pieces, it was my biggest scale that I worked on was during the Rubel Museum residency. When the first, I actually saw the canvas. It was empty, an empty canvas, and
How big was that painting?
It was about 180 by 150. So it was just big, and that wasn't my intention to go there and paint these huge scale paintings. I just saw the canvas and the stretches, and I'm like, who is here to paint this huge? And they told me it was one artist that was supposed to come and then work, but he couldn't make it. And one of the directors at the museum said, it would have been nice if you have one cowboy on there. And I thought it was very intimidating because I have never worked on that scale before. But again, I love the challenge and I like to push myself, so I thought, why not? And then the first thing that came in mind, how am I going to scale this so that I get the right proportion and all that? And I usually go on freehand sketching, but with this, they came up with the idea of if I have the image, I should try and project it on it and see the scale and how I want it to be. So once we tried it and projected the image on it, it's just like, it was amazing. So I thought, okay, this is actually another way of, making things easier, and then getting the right proportion. And also try to incorporate digital, like I said, when I graduated, like also putting in digital and like combining those two in the practice, so it makes things easier and you get the right proportion. So that was where I started using the projector. So my bigger scale work, I mostly use the projector to get the right proportion before.
You projected this
Yeah, before I sketched. So I projected this one, sketched it out, and then straightforward started applying the colors. And I always start with the eyes first because that is my main focus. That is where I want the attention to be drawn. Again, it's also an inspiration from the old masters when I walk into the giant museums and see the portraits and the stare when they stare back at you and the intensity of the eyes. And then, so I get that inspiration from there. And the same feeling I want to create when I'm painting. So I always start with the eyes. So all the paintings you see here, I spend more hours with the eyes than the actual whole body of the painting. So I usually go to the studio around 8:30 and I start painting around 9. 9, I start with the eyes and I probably finish the eye around 1 p.m. or something. It's just spending more time so I can get that intensity of the whole thing.
And then with these works in particular, a lot more texture in the hair, a lot more texture in the surface, the background, more mixed media. So in the case of Sheena, you see the tassels. In the case of the Rodeo Boys, you see the patches. Why are you pushing the texture? Why are you incorporating the mixed media? And then on top of that, the introduction of sculpture. What's motivating you to push this and not be satisfied with where you've got to, I guess, in your career?
I wanted to move out from the normal practice and the normal tool, which is the brush and the palette knife and all of that. I wanted to move and, you know, just expand and broaden wise my practice because I wanted to, you know, see what else I can use apart from just the paint and brush. What other materials that I can explore with, that I can replace instead of like painting the actual thing. So I also thought it would be more, you know, fun for people, the viewer, to come in and like explore what is in the painting and actually get involved with the painting and, you know, find how what is there and what is not there, what is real there, the difference between what is real and what is not. So just to play around that. So I've been working with a lot of materials that I will be incorporating as time goes on. So these are some of the things that so far I have come up with. And like I said, when it comes to the sculpture, I mean, when you come to Europe, I walk around and I see the buildings, the architecture, the sculptures. I just take photos of it because I've been a big fan of sculpture for a long time, but I've always been scared to, you know, do something with it and practice on it. And each time that I create something small, I just demolish it and throw it out because I don't want anybody to see how ugly it is. And I hide it. And so it's just time and time and time. And then when I finally
So why did you use this opportunity to say, I'm going to put myself out there, I'm going to be vulnerable?
I mean, I thought this is Europe. If I will have the better criticism, it will be Europe. They are known for their sculpture and they are good at it. So it's just to be there so that I see what people say about it. And then if I'm giving the bad criticism, I'll know that, hey, you need to be better at this. But I thought this was the best time to show it, and where else than Europe to show that.
And then one more question, and then we'll take questions from the audience. In the front room, you have 2 works on paper, 2 works on fabric. I was surprised by the fabric because I know it as a mixed media tool, but I didn't know it as a surface. Can you talk a little bit about those 2 works, the fabric, and where you hope to go with that particular body of work?
I went to a craft shop just to get patches for the cowboy, and then this shop is huge. So I decided to explore and see what else they have that might be interesting. So I went to the fabric session and then I saw that gold fabric and I thought it was interesting. It just stood out for me. So I bought a whole roll of it, not knowing what I would do with it, but it's just an idea that I have, like maybe I'll use it somehow in my work. So I brought it to the studio, and I have never shown any of my paperwork or my fabric work. So I thought I should try it out and see, not knowing how it will turn out. Just the first, these are the first ever that I've produced. So the first
This
one
is a total experiment.
it's a total experiment.
Okay.
So it came out great.
I think you did a good job.
Yeah, so it came out great. I'm like, okay, why not? So in the future, I think I'll be using it more and more, and even in bigger scale.
And then my last question, why was it important for this body of work, this group of work, to be the first show that you did at Almin, the first show you do in Europe? Like, why not have done Black Rodeo in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about Texas or the US, we know Cowboys, and then people know about them in the US and the States. So I thought it would be more interesting to bring the conversation in Europe rather than being in the States, so that we expand this conversation so that other people that don't know about it will also kind of like, get to know the educational and then like, the information, to extract information out of it so that they can also, from here, they can also, go out there and like, find more about it rather than just being in the US where people, I feel like US, they know about this Black African American Cowboys, but they just don't like to talk about it, So it wasn't the focus place for me to show this, but to bring it in Europe so that I just give this information out to people that didn't know that whole side about African American cowboys in the U.S. I believe a lot of people know that, cowboys in America, but they don't know the African American cowboys in them. So.
Yeah, because one thing that's important to point out, we were doing the research, at the turn of the 20th century, 25% of cowboys were Black. Yeah. And most people, that's a significant number. It's not 3%, it's a quarter. My last question, because I know I said I had a last question. What is one thing that you learned from working on this show that you think will help push the practice?
Well, a lot of things. First of all, the information that I'm getting out, the research, and it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Like, for instance, we wouldn't even get to know about African American cowboys if it wasn't for the outlaws and the outcasts, like those ones that were super skillful and then went ahead and did a lot with their skills. They were the ones that were actually made this whole African American cowboy famous because they did extraordinary things. So they were well documented. And even some of them, the real stories of them were used in these Hollywood movies, which they turned the whole movie around, like, so they didn't tell the real story. So if it wasn't for them, I don't think there would be a well documented about, African American cowboys, even though there were a whole bunch of them. But these ones that did extraordinary things actually brought forth all of the history and then the true story. That is why you have a couple of names that will pop up when you type on the internet, and then you see all those names and all of that. Yeah. So it just goes deep and deep and deep. And it's not only about the rodeo shows or the cowboy or the fashion, but it's also about the community and the history about it and how it's been passed on from generation to generation, and how some of them were born into slavery and then like moved back and made money and went back and bought their land and the plantation, and like they still, are into cotton production and all of that. So it's a whole lot, and there is more, things to talk about than not just the rodeo shows and the Cowboys.
I want to open it up to a couple of questions. Please don't be shy. I'm sure we have someone who can translate if your French is better than your English.
Why do you use the lines on the faces of the boys?
Oh, the lines is a form of identity back home, where I come from in Ghana. There are a lot of tribes, just like in the States, where you have like different states and the kind of people that live there. So these tribes have these scarifications of their faces that you can tell where they come from or which tribe they belong to, or depending on how many marks the person has on the face determines on how wealthy or of a family they come from, all of that. So it's a way of identification, and it all makes sense to me when I came to the US as well, where people had tattoos, and it's a way of identifying them, or it's something personal to them that has in relation to them. So I thought it would be interesting to also play with that when it comes to identity.
Anyone else?
I've got a question. In some of the pieces, you can see, I think there's some added touches maybe with the painted nails or the glitter or the jewelry. Is this something that you've imagined and you've put into the piece, or that's how they dress, or you're kind of tweaking it slightly to say a message in some way?
No, it's a message in some way, because it's part of the things that I see when I go around, especially when it comes to the black community. Black girls don't joke with their nails, especially, and with their hair and all that. So we all have our way of living and how we want people to see us. So and when it comes to the new generation of cowboys, it's not like way back in history when they dress in the traditional form. Now you have a cowboy that has his traditional hat on, but he has a Nike or Adidas on. So it's just introducing the new fashion sense in it, that you see them now riding their horses, but they are in their normal clothes, but with dress. So it's just also trying to keep that in mind when doing these things. Yeah.
Anyone else? You don't got a question about your painting?
And
So this is Everett Taylor.
This is Everett Taylor. He's the one.
How are you here?
Yeah, he is the one in the election reform. He's one of my great friends, and I thank him for posing for me, and it was fun. So,
what was it like to pose?
Interestingly enough, I've never put on a cowboy hat before. I've never, I literally have never put on a cowboy hat, and I actually have hair, so it was like a challenge getting the hat. The hat was a little bit small. We made it. Yeah. We made it work. But no, it was a really interesting experience, and it's like that trust that you have with an artist and their vision. Like, I felt ridiculous. Like, I felt ridiculous holding this rifle. I felt ridiculous in this hat. But I trusted Otis's vision, and I believe in him so much as an artist. And to see that come to life, I'm like, okay, trust was well worth it.
I do have a question. It might be a little bit of a difficult one, but I've seen the progression that you've had over the last few years, which has been pretty huge. From a more 2D, seeing all the textures and more kind of sculptural, and the skin tones and skin colours. You bringing that here, what have you learned from the criticism that you might have got from kind of pushing yourself by putting it into Europe, where there are less black people than in the US? What is the kind of, maybe not criticism, what has the feedback been, or have you learned anything from the feedback from other people from the West?
I mean, yeah, there's been the good and the bad, but when you aim and you are focusing, like putting something out there, that is my main focus. I try not to let the criticism get to me so much. You don't ignore it. You think about it a lot, but how do you use that criticism to better your skills? That is what I do. Because when I first got to Portland and was painting in this skin tone, I actually have people that come to me and like, if you really want to sell, don't be painting in that skin tone. And that didn't stop me. I was actually interested, like, why would he say that? And then, getting to live there longer and see what is going on, I got what he was trying to say. But, I mean, it's just like telling me I cannot exist in my own skin tone. So I just instead of it affecting me in a bad way, I rather use it and perfecting the skin and and that's how I've been able to get here.
And you're doing an amazing job.
Thank you.
One more question. There we go.
You riding horses yourself?
Oh no. I love horses, but I'm super scared of getting close. They are beautiful when they stare them from afar, but once you get, I mean, their butt alone is like that. So I love horses, but I'm always scared to get closer to them.
That's the next challenge.
That's the next challenge. But I've been invited so many times to go to these rodeo shows, but unfortunately I haven't been so far because of the pandemic when it hit him. So now that things are getting clear, I want to face my fears and like. So next time in the next show, I'll be, making an entrance on the horse. So, so don't worry.
I will not forget that.
I think with that, thank you, Otis. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your time. Please really spend time with the works because there's a lot of details. I think Otis is becoming a bit of a trickster with the paintings. So something may look like mixed media, but it actually may be something he's painted and vice versa. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Amin, Ashley, the team at the gallery, everybody who came from far and wide. We really appreciate it and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Easy.